She thought the royal guard was just for tourists until she stood in their way. What happened next taught her, and everyone watching, a powerful lesson in respect. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more real stories behind British tradition. Deborah Whitmore arrived at Buckingham Palace not with reverence, but with entitlement. Her sharp heels echoed against the cobblestones, turning heads before she even reached the gates. Dressed in high-end athleisure wear and sunglasses that screamed wealth, she exuded the confidence of someone used to getting her way. To her, the traditions unfolding around the palace weren't worthy of respect. They were merely background for her next social photo. When asked to wait in line, like everyone else, she dismissed the idea entirely, cutting past families and even nudging a child in her hurry. "Do you know who I am?" she snapped at the palace staff, irritated that protocol didn't bend to her schedule. She had a lunch reservation at the Ritz, and centuries of tradition would have to move aside. Even when gently reminded by a father with young children, she planted herself directly in the ceremonial path of the Queen's Guard. Deborah wasn't just ignoring etiquette, she was defying it. Unaware of the significance of the guards she mocked, she mistook silent discipline for theatrical performance. In that moment, Deborah became the embodiment of entitlement clashing with heritage, a lesson that would soon be taught not with words, but with unwavering tradition. As the crowd at Buckingham Palace gathered in quiet anticipation, there was a shared sense of respect in the air. Visitors from around the world stood patiently, cameras ready, awaiting the timeless spectacle of the changing of the guard. But Deborah Whitmore remained an outlier, untouched by the reverence that filled the courtyard. Rather than step aside or follow instruction, she defiantly planted herself in the very path the guards were set to march. A young family tried to maneuver past her, their children excited to catch a glimpse of the soldiers, but Deborah dismissed them with a wave of her manicured hand. When a retired military veteran approached to explain the seriousness of her actions, she scoffed at him. His medals, earned in service, held no meaning for her. "They're just playing dress-up," she mocked, referring to the Queen's Guard. What Deborah failed to understand, and refused to hear from those around her, was that the guards were not part of a theme park attraction. These were real soldiers, bound by order and tradition, performing a sacred duty that stretched back centuries. Despite repeated warnings from security and fellow onlookers, she refused to move. Her arrogance made her believe that ceremony would yield to convenience, that tradition would bend to privilege. But in doing so, she wasn't merely ignoring a rule. She was challenging an institution. For those who stood by and watched, her actions were more than rude. They were unsettling. To see someone so boldly disregard something others held dear, especially military order, was disturbing. But for those who had served, who had stood at attention themselves, her defiance was all too familiar. They knew, as she soon would, that when tradition and protocol are challenged, the response is neither theatrical nor personal. It is precise, and it is inevitable. The rhythmic sound of boots on ancient stone echoed across the courtyard as the Queen's Guard approached in flawless formation. Among them was Guard James Windsor, a man whose stoic bearing was the product of both ceremonial training and battlefield experience. He had served tours in Afghanistan, where discipline wasn't a performance, it was survival. Yet, here he was, back on home soil, carrying out a different kind of duty, one steeped in tradition and protocol, but no less serious. As he led his unit toward the eastern gate of Buckingham Palace, his eyes registered the obstruction ahead. Deborah Whitmore. She stood arrogantly in the middle of their path, phone held high, utterly unaware of, or unwilling to accept, the gravity of the moment. Despite the clear warnings from security and bystanders alike, she refused to move. She believed the guards would go around her. She believed, perhaps, that the ceremony would bend to her will. But the guard does not yield. Its duty is not dictated by tourist expectations or social media moments. It is governed by centuries of discipline and unwavering commitment. And so, with seamless execution, Guard Windsor performed a controlled shoulder barge, clearing Deborah from the path as he continued forward, without missing a step. Her fall was undramatic, but telling. Her phone flew from her hand. Her pride hit the cobblestones with her. And in a final poetic note of consequence, Windsor's boot, unintentionally, but unavoidably, came down upon the very hand she'd flung out to break her fall. The impact was not cruel, it was calculated inevitability. Deborah had made herself an obstacle in a system that does not recognize ego as authority. The crowd gasped. Some children looked away. The veteran who had warned her earlier shook his head, having seen this pattern before. Arrogance crashing headlong into order. Yet the guards' formation never faltered. Their march continued, unbroken, unbothered, unyielding. What happened in that courtyard was not an act of aggression. It was an expression of unshakable purpose. In a world quick to confuse silence with weakness, Deborah learned that real power often moves quietly, but when it moves, it does so with precision and undeniable force. Deborah Whitmore's fall might have bruised her pride more than her body, but the moment she hit the cobblestones, her outrage ignited like a firestorm. With her sunglasses flung aside and her designer bag crumpled on the ground, she scrambled up and began shouting accusations. "I was assaulted," she cried, cradling her hand, which had, unfortunately, found itself beneath the boot of a marching guard. She looked to the crowd for sympathy, for agreement, for someone to affirm her belief that she had been wronged, but all she found were cameras and quiet disapproval. Several tourists had caught the entire episode on video, from the initial warnings to her refusal to move. No one had pushed her, no one had targeted her. The footage and the truth were not on her side. As security officers approached, trying to maintain order and calm the situation, Deborah's voice grew louder. She demanded the name of the guard who attacked her, insisted she would sue, and threatened to bring in her husband's lawyers. But her words rang hollow in the ears of the onlookers who had witnessed the entire exchange. The retired veteran, who had warned her earlier, stood silently, a look of sadness mixed with resignation etched across his face. He had seen this before, civilians confusing ceremony for performance and mistaking dignity for weakness. Police officers arrived quickly, professional and composed. One began gathering witness statements, the other approached Deborah, notebook in hand. But when she recounted the incident, her version didn't match what everyone else had seen. Her claims of unprovoked assault didn't hold up against the chorus of statements from tourists and veterans alike, many of whom had warned her to step aside. The officers gently informed her that the Queen's Guard under protocol was authorized to continue their march and remove obstructions as necessary. Still, she raged. "You can't ignore this! He stomped on my hand," she cried. Yet no one moved to console her. There was no crowd rallying to her defense. Instead, there was an unspoken understanding among those present that Deborah had not been attacked, but had learned a difficult lesson about responsibility and respect. Her indignation could not rewrite the truth that had played out so clearly in front of dozens of witnesses. As Deborah Whitmore's protests grew louder, so too did the clarity of her mistake. But the most sobering moment came not from her yelling, nor from the onlookers' judgment. It came when Captain Roberts of the Queen's Guard arrived. Unlike the shouting and finger-pointing that had filled the courtyard, his presence brought with it an undeniable calm, forged by years of military discipline. Dressed in full ceremonial uniform, he listened patiently as Deborah demanded arrests, threatened lawsuits, and denounced the guard who had removed her from the ceremonial route. She wanted punishment. She wanted an apology. What she received instead was something much more powerful: the truth. With unwavering composure, Captain Roberts explained that the guards are not performers, but combat-trained soldiers, many of whom had served in real war zones. Guard Windsor, the very man she had accused, had completed multiple tours in Afghanistan. His actions weren't rogue or excessive, they were textbook protocol. Deborah's injuries, as unfortunate as they were, stemmed not from aggression, but from her own refusal to follow lawful warnings. When the police officers confirmed the same, that no action against the guard would be taken, Deborah was stunned. Her threats no longer held weight. Her social status had no bearing here. In front of a crowd that now fully grasped the difference between ceremony and service, Captain Roberts didn't just defend his soldier. He defended the entire tradition they represented. The moment served as a reminder to everyone watching that real authority doesn't shout. It stands firm, honors its duty, and answers arrogance not with anger, but with truth. As the dust settled and Deborah Whitmore was escorted from the palace grounds, something far more powerful than her angry words lingered in the air, a quiet sense of reverence. Guard James Windsor, the very man at the center of the conflict, had not said a single word during the encounter. He had not raised his voice, nor deviated from his duty. And yet, in his stillness, he had delivered a message that resonated more deeply than any argument could. His composure under pressure, his unwavering posture, and his respect for the centuries-old traditions he embodied reminded the crowd that true strength is not always loud. It is often quiet, grounded, and unshakable. For many in the crowd, especially those of the older generation who had served or lived through eras of great change, the moment struck a chord. They saw in Guard Windsor not just a ceremonial figure, but a living symbol of discipline, dignity, and duty. His silence wasn't weakness. It was the embodiment of control, of knowing who you are and what you represent. It was a kind of strength that doesn't need to prove itself, because it is rooted in service, not ego. In contrast, Deborah's shouting, her demands, and her refusal to listen seemed increasingly hollow. Where she had tried to dominate through volume, Guard Windsor had prevailed through principle. And in the end, the lesson became clear to everyone present. Respect is not earned through defiance or outrage, but through quiet resolve and the willingness to stand for something greater than oneself. That day, tradition did not yield, and neither did the values that have carried the Royal Guard through generations. In a world that often values speed, noise, and instant gratification, the story of Guard Windsor reminds us of a timeless truth. Real strength lies in restraint, and true respect begins with understanding. When entitlement clashes with tradition, it is not volume that prevails, but quiet dignity, shaped by service and discipline. For those of us who have lived through decades of change, through war, through peace, through shifting social norms, this lesson feels especially poignant. We understand that ceremony isn't just theater, it's a symbol of sacrifice, of duty passed down through generations. It reminds us that not all rules are meant to be challenged. Some are meant to be honored. Let this story serve as a gentle reminder to look deeper, to listen before reacting, and to stand firm in what we believe is right, without arrogance, but with principle. Whether in family, community, or country, respecting the roles others play and the traditions they carry is one of the most powerful ways we preserve dignity in a rapidly changing world. If this message touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's continue honoring the values that have shaped us and pass them on to the next generation. Your voice matters,